How difficult will the next 12 months be?
Well, it's impossible to predict how things go because we're in a unique event. The UK is leaving the European Union. No country has done that before, so every single thing that you do is done for the first time. And that's why you'll get all this volatility, because nobody quite knows how that will impact on things. That was always the case with Brexit. I think I'm personally of the view that the positives are enormous should we take the right decisions when we leave. It gives us a huge, great ability to enhance our trade, not just with the European Union, but around the rest of the world. And I think even if we were in WTO, the issue of no deal, which is the language used, I have to keep saying to everybody, there is no such thing as a no deal. There is just a different deal. It may not be the deal on the table, but it will be an arrangement, whether it's a free trade arrangement or the WTO.
But would
rules-based
WTO rules actually make this country worse off for at least a limited number of years?
Well, that may be the case, or it may not be the case. My general view, though, is that people voted to leave the European Union, and for all the talk, the European Union, we go on about the European Union as though it was really all about trade and about finance. It's not. The European Union is a political project, and where we are now is not where we'll be even in 5 years from now. The plans going forward for the European Union are ever tighter union, greater control, centralised. No, it's forward-looking. Greater control of taxation. So my point that I'm simply making is that we chose to leave. The question is, how do we make the most of it when we leave?
Right, which is my question to you. So how do you not want to safeguard financial services to make sure? I mean, this economy is so dependent on financial services.
But the threats to financial services by remaining a member of the EU are enormous at the moment, because the attitude of the EU is to continue to regulate, and regulate in a way which I have to say would be enormously damaging to the City of London. And even the Bank of England has come out and said, actually outside the EU, the City of London could thrive because, of course, we can set our regulations relevant to the kind of global business that we want coming in. I want to enhance financial services dramatically and make sure the UK is the global centre.
By doing tax cuts, becoming more Singapore-like?
Yeah, I'd like to be very flexible about making sure that we regulate for the UK, for the City of London on a global basis, but also at the same time, lots of things that were carried out previously by the Conservative government, which I had issues with, the non-dom status and things like that. I think it's time for us to review all of that, because if we want to be the global centre, we have to start behaving as though we really are the global centre.
So would that be a more Singapore-like kind of deal?
Well, it's a very different concept. What we are is the UK in a very rules-based organisation with one of the best law structures for contract law in the world, and we can enhance all of that because it's very attractive to people. I mean, you've even got courts setting up in the Middle East right now using English law, contract law, to settle their disputes.
But how do you match the two? So if you want to deliver for the common person that feels like he or she hasn't benefited from the EU up north in some of the country, the parts of the country that have voted for Brexit, how do you match that with then taking care of your financial system to a Monaco-like kind of industry?
Well, it's not that. What I'm saying is that the UK, who does most of its trade outside of the EU, after 40 years, we are more trading even in goods outside the EU than we do inside the EU, and the trend for that is
still a big chunk.
So but it's a diminishing level. I think it's about 8% of our companies in the UK actually export to the EU, and we tend to get this slightly out of perspective. My point really is that we are leaving, so we need to work on how we make the most of that. And the truth is, one of the great things that we discover about the UK is that British companies have simply not invested in training, automation and skilling at the level with their competitors. So now we have to say, let's really go hard on getting British companies to start investing in people's skilling. I think in the UK, if you start life on an entry-level work, only 15% of those people who start life at entry-level jobs will go on beyond entry-level for the rest of their lives. That is a shocking indictment of the failure of industry to invest in people, to automate, to bring in technology. So we've got a real opportunity to start changing all of that.
I don't know how much this has to do with the EU, but do you believe that actually the next Prime Minister should be pro-Brexit, and is Boris Johnson your man? Well,
we have to be pro-Brexit because that's where we are.
But Theresa May isn't.
Well, Theresa May is, but her views on the Chequers deal, not everybody agrees with them. I don't particularly think they're.
Is that too watered down?
Be acceptable. Well, I just don't. I think it's it's neither fish nor fowl. I think it's locked us in on goods, gives us very little flexibility on things. Financial service would be in a better position, I'm sure, but I think it gives too much control by the European Court of Justice.
So should Boris Johnson be in charge?
No, I don't think it's about leadership at this point. It's about getting the right arrangement. And I think anyway, you know, this is only the beginning of this. And I think all sorts of stuff like possibility of free trade arrangements, free trade deals that will come out of this in the next 3 to 4 months. So I'm, as ever, optimistic about this. I think that when it comes to the crunch, as it always does, you know, there is too much at stake for the EU and too much at stake for the UK not to ensure that we end up in a good trading position afterwards. And they've got to put their politics to one side and recognise this is about jobs and livelihoods. It's not about the overarching political beliefs of Mrs. Merkel as to how Europe should go, regardless of what happens to other countries.
Right. Who do you think will give in more? Is it the EU that will allow the UK to cherry pick? Or is it the UK giving up on certain of the red lines that the government has put in place?
Well, I don't think it's a case of cherry-picking at all. I think it's a case of saying, look, what's in the best interests of the two groups, the UK and the EU, and what's in their best interest? You know, we happen to have the dominant set of financial services here. It's in their interest, you know, raising their funds, you know, doing their trade through here to the rest of the world. It's in their interest to have a thriving City of London, for example. In fact, it wasn't me that said that. The German finance minister said that earlier on. He said, we have no benefit if we see London diminished. So it's that point that we need to get down to what is the benefit to both sides. And that's to have as frictionless, as Mrs. May has said, trade and at the same time good cooperation. But we're outside and we will not be coming back in.
Do you think Theresa May is doing a good job? I don't know, if you had to score, if she had a report card, what figure would you give her from like 0 to 10?
Well, I've just said it's work in progress. You can't score it until you get to the end.
We don't have that much time left, with all due respect.
Yeah, but it's always, I have to tell you, the European Union came up with this wacky idea that they were going to settle all the details first and then what the overall relationship is. It should have been the overall relationship first and then the details. But we are where we are, so now we have to get down to it. And in truth, almost everything arranged in the EU is always arranged at the last minute, because that seems to be the culture of the way they work. But what is quite clear, for the first time, this idea of an absolute united front of the European Union is breaking down. You've got countries now disagreeing with the Commission. This tells you that you're going to get into quite a fractious kind of negotiation period now.